Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti from OnlinePhotographyTraining.com. Welcome to my video series, Learn Lightroom CC, also known as Lightroom in the Cloud. In this video, we're going to take a close look at the tone curve that's found in Lightroom CC. In our last video, I mentioned that I might talk about the gradient tool in this video as well, but I've decided to talk about the tools in a video all their own, and I'm going to be doing that in our next video. Now, I mentioned we're going to be talking about the tone curve. Now, we have this image here, and the tone curve is kind of hidden in Lightroom CC. If you go up to the top right-hand corner and you click on the Edit icon, and you click on Light, you'll notice there's this little icon to the right, and that's our tone curve. So when we click on that, the tone curve opens, and it's down here at the bottom. Now, we actually have a number of different curves inside of this tone curve. Right now, we're looking at the point curve, and this is kind of the standard curve that people are probably used to, people that have come over from Photoshop and other photo editing programs are used to the point curve. But also included in this one curve area here is something called the parametric curve. And that is available in Lightroom Classic CC as well. But as you'll find, those of you that are familiar with Lightroom Classic CC, it's a lot easier to use in Lightroom Classic CC. It's a little more difficult to use in Lightroom CC. Now, going along with the point curve, there's three curves kind of inside of that point curve, and that is the red channel, green channel, and blue channel curves. And we'll be talking about all of those. And we're going to start our discussion with the point curve by explaining exactly what a curve is. Well, if you look at the curve itself, you'll notice behind the curve there's a histogram back here. And you'll notice at the top there's also a histogram showing. Now, all the histogram is, it's a plot of the tone of every single pixel in the image. The more of that specific tone you have, the higher the peak will appear. So if you look at it from the left-hand side, these are the darkest tones. So anything that's really dark gets plotted on the left. And the more of those exact dark tones you have, the higher the peak will be. As you move to the right, you'll move from dark to shadows, then from shadows to midtones, then from midtones to highlights, and then from highlights to whites. And as you look at this image, you can see that it's mostly clouds. There's a lot of clouds here. So you'll notice that the peak of the tone curve is more towards the right where the highlights are. So there's a lot of highlights in this image. There's also a peak over here, and these seem to be the darker midtones. And this is probably the land down in here that's getting plotted. So we have this histogram back here. Now on top of the histogram, we have this diagonal line. What this diagonal line allows us to do is it allows us to either make lighter or darker the curve or the part of the histogram that is directly below that line, or the tones that the histogram represents that is directly below that line. So again, if we're at this far left-hand side of this diagonal line, those are the blacks. As we move up to the right-hand corner of the box, we'll go through shadows, then darker midtones, then lighter midtones, then highlights, and then whites. And if you want to, let's say, make the midtones brighter, you would put a point on the midtones, which is right in the middle. That's why it's called a point curve. We added a point. Now we could take that point and we could move it up or down. When we move it up, we're going to make whatever tones are underneath that point brighter. So I'll just take it and push it up, and you'll notice the image in general is getting brighter. It's brightening up the midtones. Now if I pull it down, it's going to make those darker. So that's how we can manipulate the luminance values of different tones in our image. Now most often you'll find that photographers will use the point curve to add contrast to their image. And all contrast is you're taking the darker bits of the image and making them just a little darker, and you're taking the lighter bits of the image and you're making those just a little lighter. So the way you would do that with the tone curve is typically, you might have noticed, first of all, as I move that up, it's a curve. It's not just taking the actual tones that were directly below that point and moving only those brighter. It's moving those the brightest, but then it's kind of curving and making the tones around it a little brighter as well. So that's the curve part of it. Well, what you could do is you could anchor down tones by putting down a point. So that middle point is anchoring down the midtones. So those hopefully won't move that much. Then what we want to do is we want to make the darker tones a little darker and the lighter tones a little lighter. By definition, that's really what contrast is. So we'll go down here where the darker tones are and put another point, and we're going to make those a little darker. So we'll pull those down. And you can see those darker tones are getting a little darker. Then we're going to make the lighter tones a little lighter. So we'll go up here where the highlights are and put a point there and push that up. So that's making the highlights a little lighter. So that in effect added contrast to the image. And I'll turn this off by clicking on this little on-off switch. And there's before and there's after. You can see we added contrast to the image with the point curve. So it's relatively easy to do. And what the point curve allows you to do, it allows you to be a little more specific of what tones you're going to be affecting than, say, the contrast slider. The contrast slider just really kind of makes lighter things lighter, darker things darker in general. Whereas with the point curve, you could be more specific. If you don't want to affect the darker midtones, you could put another point here and kind of level those off. So you're just making the darker shadows darker. And then we could do the same for the lighter midtones. Put a second point there and straighten that out. So we're just making the lighter highlights a bit, or we're just making the highlights a bit lighter. So that's how you could really manipulate that curve more specifically to what you want your image to render as. Now, if you want to reset this, if you look up here right where it says point curve, if you hold in the Alt or Option key, it's Alt if you have a PC, Option if you have a Mac, you'll see there's Reset Curves. So we'll click on that and we reset it. Now we're back to the beginning. Now I mentioned inside of the point curve is really three other curves, the red, green, and blue curve. And to demonstrate what these do, I think it's easier if I convert our image to black and white so you could better see what is happening. And to do that, right at the very top underneath this histogram where it says Edit, you'll see B and W. Just click that and now we have a black and white image. Now, even though we have a black and white image, red, green, and blue curves will affect the image. So we'll go to red first. We'll click on this little dot right here. And you'll notice as I click on these, it kind of gets shaded a bit, that color in a way. And let me try to explain. Now, if you look at this, again, you would think that you would then take red tones and you'd make them darker if you push down or pull down, and red tones and make them lighter if you push the curve or the diagonal line up. Well, that's not really true. What you're going to do is you're going to actually intensify that color only if you push it to this top left-hand corner. So if we're clicked on red and I want to shade the midtones red, if I go in the middle and I push this curve towards that top left-hand corner, I'm starting to add kind of a red tinge to the entire image. Well, what happens if you do the opposite? What happens if you pull it down to this bottom right-hand corner? Well, you'll get the subtractive complementary color to red, and that is cyan. So if I pull this way, we'll start to tinge all the pixels in the image cyan. So red's that way, cyan's that way. And you could do it a little more specifically. Let's say we'll put this anchor point down in the middle. Let's put another one, another anchor point down in the darker midtones. Then I'm going to go down here where the shadows are, and I want my shadows tinged cyan. So I'm going to put a point there, and I'll just pull that towards this corner. All right, tinge those. Now I want the highlights tinged red, so I'll put anchor point there, kind of straighten that out. And I want the highlights tinged red, so I could go that way. So the highlights are getting red. And now that looks horrible, but that's just for demonstration purposes. So I'm going to reset this. I'm going to hold the Alt or Option key in. Again, it's Alt if you have PC, Option if you have a Mac. Click on Reset Curves. So that's what red does. Now if we go to green, similarly, if we go to this top left-hand corner of the box, we're going to tinge whatever tones are underneath this diagonal line green. So we'll go and we'll do midtones. We'll put a point right in the middle, and I'll go towards that left-hand corner, and we're getting green. Now if we go to the bottom right-hand corner, we're going to get the subtractive complementary color of green, which is magenta. So we'll go that way, and you can see green, magenta. So that's how you could affect those specific colors in the image. Now, of course, if this was a color image, let's just for sake of demonstration, go to the color image. Similarly, I will be tinging this color image green if I go to the top left-hand corner, or magenta if I go to that lower right-hand corner with the red curve, or I'm sorry, the green curve. I apologize, I'm looking right at it and I'm calling it red. It's the green curve. So let's reset this. Now we'll go to blue. And blues, same thing. If you go to this top left-hand corner, we're going to get blue. So we'll click a point right in the midtone area there and go that way. And you can see we're shading everything blue. Conversely, if I go to the lower right-hand corner, we'll get the subtractive complementary color of blue, which is yellow. And there you can see we're getting yellow. Now, often, a lot of photographers like to take a black and white image and give it an old-time film look. And what they'll do is they'll go to the blue point curve, and they'll go and they'll put a couple anchor points toward the midtones, so those don't move. So those 3 points. Then what they'll do is they'll go to the shadow area down here. Maybe we'll even add another anchor point too. They go to the shadow area here, and they want their shadows tinged. It depends. Some people like to do it yellow. Some people like to do it blue. Let's take the shadows and tinge those blue. So I'll go down here and I'll just kind of push it up, adding a little blue to the shadows. Then they'll go to the highlights and tinge those yellow. So we'll put a point there and pull that down towards that lower right-hand corner, and we're adding a little bit of yellow. So you could see that's kind of giving it this kind of old-time film look, maybe even a cross-processing look. There's before and after. So that's what a lot of photographers often use the color channels in the point curve for, to kind of give their image either a cross-process look or an old-time film look. So I'm going to reset that. Again, I'm going to hold the Alt or Option key in and click on Reset Curves. Now, we covered the point curve, and we covered the 3 color channel curves that are actually part of the point curve. But now we're going to talk about this last one, the parametric curve. And as soon as you can see, if I'm on any of these 4, the blue, the green, the red, or the actual point curve, it says point curve up here in the left-hand corner. As soon as I click on this parametric curve, it just says tone curve here. And you can see it changes. Now, it still has the diagonal line, it still has the histogram in the background, but we now have 3 sliders down here. And I'm going to say this is a bit clunky how this parametric curve works. There is a parametric curve, those of you that watch my Lightroom Classic CC videos, that parametric curve in Lightroom Classic CC is a lot easier to use because it has actual sliders down here, 4 sliders that allow you to adjust various parts of the curve with a slider. Here it's not as intuitive what you need to do. Now if you take just a slider and you start moving it around, nothing is really happening to the image. You could see that nothing's happening to our image. So I'll reset this. So what do you really need to do? Well, let's first go back to a color image just for the heck of it. And you can see though, as I hover over it, you can see weird things are happening here. We have a point. I'm just hovering and I'm moving this point around. And then notice as I move that point around, there's kind of a bubble that forms around the point. That's kind of the area of influence. That's the part that that point will affect. The tones in the image that point will affect. So as I hover here, you can see we have that bubble going over almost half of the diagonal line. And you'll notice down in the lower right-hand corner, it says highlights. Now, as I move down towards the bottom a little more, or the bottom left-hand corner, you can see that probably 4/5 of the line has a bubble around it, and it says lights. Now, if I keep moving, that bubble kind of shifts. It still has about 4/5 of the line covered, but it seems to be more heavily weighted towards the darks or the blacks. And you can see that lower right-hand corner says darks. And then if I go even further, eventually we'll get that smaller bubble down in the lower left-hand corner, and it says shadows. Well, let's just say that I want to do something with midtones. So I'm going to put a point there. Well, you're not really putting a point there. See, it doesn't do it. There's no points added to this curve. What you need to do is just kind of grab the curve and move it. So I'll push this up. So we're making our midtones brighter, and it's pretty much doing the exact same thing the point curve did, right? It's making those kind of midtones brighter. Well, what is controlling the midtones? As I'm moving there, you can see that kind of bubble forms out, and that's the area of influence. Well, I could change that area of influence by moving now this slider. And as I move it, you'll see the image is changing now. Whereas when I didn't move the diagonal line at all, and I moved these sliders down here, nothing happened. Now you could see something is happening. Now I'm going to reset this and try to better show you with the shadows. Let's go down here in the shadow area, right above this line here, or this slider right here. And if I hover over that, you see it says 25. Okay, so that's its value. It's valued 25. We're going to put a point roughly right above that. And I'll take this point and I'll move it up. So I'm making the shadows brighter. Now you can see as I hover over there, the area of influence is that kind of bubble that's around it. But if I take this and I move this, that changes the area of influence. So if I move this way to the right, we're starting to influence the midtones quite a bit. So that area of influence now is much larger. Now if I take this and I move it to the left, we're restricting it just to the darkest pixels, and that area of influence is smaller. See how it shrinks more and more the more left I move that. The more right I move this, the larger it goes. So this parametric curve isn't really intuitive in my opinion, and it's a little more difficult to use. So my opinion and my suggestion is that the point curve is a little more powerful, or a little more easier to use, and a little more obvious of what you're doing. So I would suggest you use that over this parametric curve. But this is kind of neat to experiment with. You could see what you could do. If you want to mess around, let's say, with these shadows down here, you could come down here where the shadow area is and kind of, let's say, move this. I want to make them darker, so I'll move it down. But then I could come in here with this slider and see how that affects it. Maybe fine tune it with that slider. Then I could come in here with this midtones and maybe make those a little darker. But then I could fine tune it with this slider. Then I could come in here with the highlights, and make those maybe a little brighter, and then fine tune it with that slider. So you could come in and experiment with this. Again, it's not entirely intuitive in my opinion. So I'll reset this. I'm going to hold the Alt or Option key in again and click right there. So typically on this image, all I would do is probably add contrast with the point curve, and I would do that S curve that I did earlier. I would put a point in the middle. I would also probably put another point on either side of it just to anchor it down a little better, because I don't really want to adjust the midtones as much as just the shadows by making the shadows a little darker by pulling that down. and making the highlights a little brighter by pushing that up. Not that much. Just like that. And there's before, and there's after. Before, after. And that's it. That's everything you probably need to know about the point curve, the parametric curve, and the red, green, and blue channel curves that are in Lightroom CC. Again, in our next video, I'm going to cover the tools that are available in Lightroom CC a little more thoroughly. And so we'll go through all these tools over here on the right-hand side. I did touch upon them already. And the ones I already talked about, I'll either skip altogether in the next video because we already talked about them, or I'll just give you a slight overview of something that I failed to talk about in one of those previous videos. But mainly we're going to be talking about the brush, the gradient tool, and the linear gradient tool, and the radial gradient tool. So we'll be talking about that in our next video. Thank you everyone for watching my video series, Learn Lightroom CC. If you could do me a favor and like and share the video and subscribe to my YouTube channel, I'd really appreciate that as well. Also, in the description below this video will be a link to my website. Come visit my website, onlinephotographytraining.com. There you'll find all kinds of free photography how-to articles and videos. I'll talk to you guys soon.